this online workshop, and this is basic photography workshop, but we'll do more than that. We'll do camera settings and composition techniques in this workshop. So I'm the presenter in this workshop. My name is Sunil. So just for introduction, professional photographer I am, and I'm doing this since March 2017. And I started this online initiative due to pandemic, and since then I'm just continuing because I believe online medium is helping me to reach more and more new photographers around the world. And I believe I can share my experience, I can discuss their problem, and I can help them in their photography journey. I particularly do still life photography, nature photography, and product with food. You must have seen my portfolio. This is the kind of work I'm doing, and for this personal practice, I like to do macro artwork. I like to do minimal art photography, street life photography. Just I'm doing to get more of that hands-on for portraits. So because in street we are capturing the expressions and all, it's helping me. I like to create my work as a canvas art field, so I like to put some artistic touch in the post-processing. So that's my specialty, I can say. I'm offering all the photography services through my website, smithphotoworld.com. So if you haven't visited, you just please visit my website and see that what are the scheduled workshop I have already there till December this year. And SPW Expedition is just my venture where I'm offering all the photography courses and workshops, including outdoor and online. I have different ventures: SPW Photograph, Fine Art, and SPW Expedition, of course. So I also have Smith Photo World YouTube channel. I'm just waiting for the ideas that what kind of videos you want me to prepare, or what kind of knowledge sharing I can help with some my past experience or with the new experiments, I can say. Hopefully, if you share feedback, if you put your comments in my video, I'll go to work on that. I have my presence on social media, Trifin.px, Instagram, Facebook, with my page handle Smith Photo World. You can find me there. You can check my past work. And Smith Photo World YouTube channel. If you see that channel, I have 3 different playlists: SPW Lounge, where I'm just covering all the post-processing techniques. SPW Expedition, I'm posting the gallery work for my outdoor events there. And for hopefully I'm going to start taking interviews in my outdoor events, so I'm going to post that also. SPW BTS, behind the scenes, there I'm just going to put a complete photo making process, including post-processing also, with the help of SPW Launch. Please be on mute. You can speak definitely in this workshop when we are going to talk about the topics or different camera settings and all. Whatever the content we have, we are going to discuss, and you can definitely talk about it. But we'll be just talking around the topics what we are discussing. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel, and definitely you'll get a lot of videos of forthcoming. I'm working on the back end, and you'll see the new content soon. Scheduled for today's workshop, we'll be having 90-minute session. 90-minute session I dedicated to cover the content, but we will be having 30 minutes extra for this session. So it will be 2 hours in total duration, where I'll be covering the Q&A session. So if we require, we can stretch a little bit, but I'll try to cover in 2 hours. All participants now allowed to ask questions during session. So as I said, you can definitely ask questions. So whatever the topics we are discussing, you can ask questions around that. And if you have any extra questions, you can keep a note of it, and we'll definitely discuss in the Q&A session. And video camera sharing not allowed for better experience. So it's not allowed because I want you to have better experience of viewing and listening. So if you turn off video, that will be better for you. Keep send your questions via chat option and get answers during Q&A session. So you definitely have a note in your personal notepad for the questions you are going to ask, or you can keep sending the chat box, and definitely we'll discuss later how DSLR camera works. So we'll just try to understand the components inside the camera body and how it functions. So if you see the diagram carefully, we have legends here, we'll just try to understand the how light travel inside the camera body. So when you see this line coming inside, so this is light. You can see this legend here. So light, when reaches the camera, it passes through the lenses, group of lenses. Uh, in the lens, we have a lot of lens elements inside, and it has to pass through. And there is a reflex mirror. It is always at that we can say always at that 45-degree angle, just to help light to reflect, make that horizontal line to be vertical, and reach the pent-up prism. In term when we are in the talking about DSLR. So in the pent-up prism, the function of pent-up prism is to make that vertical light horizontal and pass through the viewfinder, where we can see the frame through the viewfinder. So you can see the components here: lens, reflex mirror, it is there, and matte focusing screen. This is matte focusing screen on top, and pent-up prism. You can see the pent-up prism here. Eyepiece we have. This is the eyepiece viewfinder on the DSLR device. Focal plane shutter. So this is the just nothing but it's a we can say shutter for the camera, which helps to stop the light while we are not taking any capture. When you are capturing the images, it will just block the light reaching the sensor. So at that time, we press the shutter release button. It opens up. It exposes the sensor to the light, and the sensor at the back, you can see the stripped line. The light reaches the sensor, and then reflex mirror go on top. It will allow the light to reach the sensor, and this is the moment of shooting. It's complete the capture. So all things describes here in the text here. You can definitely refer this text when you're watching the recording of this video. It's everything mentioned. What I'm talking here, it's the same thing mentioned here in the slide. Now we'll just talk about that how mirrorless camera works. So mirrorless camera in the market, it's really making buzz, and a lot of people talking about if they will really go for the mirrorless camera or not. If they want to purchase device, will they should they be going for the mirrorless camera instead of DSLR? So we'll just try to understand the components of it also. A lot of components taken out from the mirrorless camera. So you'll see that mirrorless camera having very less components compared to DSLRs. So only lenses you can see, and we have shutter plane again. Shutter plane is there, and image sensor again. So image sensor will be there to capture the images. And this is the new member here for the components, electronic viewfinder. So this is the new member. We'll discuss it more and more in the coming slides. So the mirrorless system is more simple than the DSLR. Here the sensor is directly exposed to the light. This generates a live preview of the scene directly to the electronic viewfinder. So when we are talking about mirrorless camera, it means we are taking live preview of the images using electronic viewfinder. So anything and everything what you see through the viewfinder, it is going to capture the same. So you will have the same result, same exposure quality, what you see through the viewfinder, and you will get the same exact image in the final capture. When the shutter release button is pressed, the door will slide up, exposing the sensor to light. After that, another door slides down to cover the sensor again, which stops the exposure and complete the capture. So that's the role of shutter in the DSLR or in the mirrorless camera device. When shutter opens, it allows the sensor to record the light, and when it closes, it will complete the capture and image will be recorded. Benefits of mirrorless camera. Well, now we'll talk about the benefits. That it's a more compact device because it's having smaller sensor, and it's making the device to be look more compact with small sensor, making the mirrorless camera is easier to carry. So it's easier to carry, and it's kind of it will give you a feel of like a point and shoot camera, that they are very lightweight and very easy to carry. Electronic viewfinder. Final image preview appears directly onto the image sensor. So as we understand, but you see through the electronic viewfinder, that will be the final image. It will going to capture the same quality of that image, offering live preview, which then displays on the rear LCD screen. This image preview allows you to adjust settings like exposure, brightness, saturation, and contrast before taking your shot. So this is the advantage that you can adjust all these settings before even taking a shot. So that's why electronic viewfinder is, we can say, advanced technique, but it'll use a lot of battery powers. We'll understand it. Image stabilization with lightweight, the camera is less prone to shaking. So because the device is very lightweight, you can easily handhold. You will have, we can say, the more control than the DSLR. DSLR body compared to mirrorless is quite, we can say, heavy, and you can't handhold it for long time. But mirrorless camera, they have good image stabilization, and with lightweight, you can easily handhold it for long time compared to DSLR. Silent mechanism, fewer moving parts inside the camera system also means less noise. So when we have fewer components inside the camera body, it means it'll be less noisy, and you will feel that it's quite robust compared to DSLR in terms of noise. Higher shooting speed. With better focusing capabilities for contrast detection and higher shutter speeds, mirrorless models makes it easier for photographers to capture at faster rate. Because it's having, we can say, the better focusing system, but it's a different. There is one lack of it. We'll understand in detail in coming slide that what are the difference in the focusing systems between the DSLR and the mirrorless camera, and how it create the difference in both devices. This is contrast detection technique, or the system mechanism it uses for focusing. So that's because of this mechanism, it provides high shutter speed, and the burst mode really improved in mirrorless camera. In DSLR, when we talk about burst modes, out of 10, it expects to give you around 6 images in good sharp quality. But in mirrorless camera, you will have this average improved very much, around 8 and 9 images out of 10. So that's the kind of advantage we have in this focusing system of contrast detection. So you can see that the mechanism here, it's quite few and lesser component compared to DSLR. What's the difference? So mirrorless camera are more lightweight. So this is the advantage first for the mirrorless camera. And mirrorless camera offers real-time preview of exposure and contrast. So that's again going in favor of mirrorless camera. But mirrorless camera have shorter battery life due to EVS. Because it's electronic viewfinder, it's going to use a lot of battery. So if you are carrying mirrorless camera, you should have at least one extra battery backup with you, because it's very difficult to survive with one battery when you are having mirrorless camera, because it's electronic viewfinder, it's going to consume and drain out the battery very fast compared to DSLR. Mirrorless cameras are costly and budget, and a budget DSLR will offer the entry-level photographer more value than a budget mirrorless camera. So if you are starting your photography journey and you are looking for a device, I would advise you to go for a budget DSLR instead of a budget mirrorless camera, because budget DSLR will give you more capability, more advanced features compared to a budget mirrorless camera, and the cost difference is huge. And you'll definitely get to know, you can just reviews, so different reviews of both devices and compare that what you will get in both devices. You'll definitely get to know that budget DSLR is a really good choice compared to a budget mirrorless camera. Mirrorless camera offers fewer accessories. Accessories are very fewer compared to DSLR, because DSLR very old in the market, and you will see that third-party attachments, lens mounts, all are available in very good quantity for DSLR compared to mirrorless. So mirrorless is still new. The company is third party coming up, but we still have a lot of opportunities for third-party attachments and all for DSLR compared to mirrorless. Mirrorless cameras shoot faster, particularly when it comes to continuous shooting or a burst of images. So burst mode is something really far improved in mirrorless camera, and we have understood why, and that's the kind of advantage we have when we are using mirrorless camera. Mirrorless camera offers more image stabilization. So as we have understood that device is lightweight, Its a lack of mirror mechanism means mirrorless camera offers more image stabilization and less shaky photos. So you will having the lightweight body, so you can handhold it for longer time. You will be able to control it. And handhold photography is something you are going to do most of the time. With mirrorless camera, lightweight body, you can say it's a kind of advantage. Mirrorless cameras have smaller sensors than the DSLR. This makes them less ideal for low light situations. So for low light situations, when the light condition is not good, like overcast day or in the evening time, if you are doing outdoor with not much lighting with you, like external lighting sources, then we can say if a DSLR you have advantage, because bigger sensor means it's going to capture more, it is going to sense more lights, it can record more lights in the sensor. And smaller sensor means you'll have lesser capability of doing your work in a low light condition. So that's the one of the points. It's quite major. We can say that deciding factor when you are going to purchase a mirrorless camera or a DSLR at the start, at least. Mirrorless cameras have less accurate autofocus system. So this is a kind of turning point, that autofocusing system of mirrorless camera, we have understood a lot of advantages for contrast detection. But contrast detection has one of the very strong, we can say, the lack of it, that it cannot measure the distance between the lens and the subject as accurately as a DSLR can. So it can measure, but it's not as accurate as a DSLR. So DSLR still having the phase detection mechanism for the focusing, and it is still able to give you more accurate result for that, and that's why it's still leading the market. Now we'll just understand the camera modes. So when we talk about camera modes in a DSLR, it's more about PSA and M modes, and these are we call exposure modes. So when we call these modes exposure mode, it means we are going to use this to control the exposure. So there are other modes also, and we can define it into three categories: auto, scene, and PSA and M modes. PSA M modes we'll call it as a professional modes kind of. PSA is a semi modes and M is a manual mode. In auto and scene modes, the camera controls shutter speeds and aperture. So if you are in auto mode of the DSLR, camera going to control all the aspects of these exposures. And PSA M modes are also known as exposure modes, and gives photographer a choice as to which element of the exposure, aperture or shutter speed you wish to control. So if you want to control one of the aspects to control exposure, you should be in the PSA and M modes. We'll understand all these modes in details. And for the buttons on the device, the left image is from Nikon. We have options to select all these modes with the dial button. And the similar way we have the dial button on the Canon device, but the name, if you see, it's quite different. For shutter speed, it's TV. For aperture, it's AD on the Canon device. Other two remain same. The P is programmable mode, and M is the manual mode. And the rightmost screen info screen is from Nikon device, and that's how the camera settings looks like on the info screen. That we can see the shutter speed, we can see the aperture, and this is the interesting part, that this is the light meter. We can see the exposure, how the exposure will be on the image, final image. If it's going more on the negative side, it will be the darker image. If it's going on the positive side, it will be the brighter image. That's how we can calculate it, but this works in manual mode. So you have to be make sure that when you are in manual mode, you should just keep an eye on that light meter, that how the exposure will be. Now we'll just understand a little bit in detail for these exposure modes. Mode P is programmed auto. Camera automatically adjusts the aperture and shutter speed. Some problem with the subscriptions. In 5 minutes, we're going to just reconnect this session. Let me complete this topic. The camera automatically adjusts the aperture and shutter speed for optimal exposure when we are in mode P. of the DSLR. Photographer can choose from different combinations of aperture and shutter speed. So when you move the dial button, uh, you'll see the settings of the combination of shutter speed and aperture is changing, and you can select it. So whatever the desired shutter speed or aperture you need for that light condition, you can select it, and you can, every time you will see that exposure is looking good, but you need to work on that combination. Most of the time in my outdoor workshop, I advise to use mode B as your helping hand to give you more control on the manual mode. So you can check what the exit settings you are getting on the mode B, and you can use the same settings in the manual mode to get more confidence to work on the manual mode. Mode S TV is a shutter priority. The photographer can choose the shutter speed, but camera automatically adjusts the aperture for optimal exposure. And likewise, we have mode A, aperture priority. So camera, you can choose the aperture, but camera going to control the shutter speed. So that's how the exposure will be maintained. These modes we call semi modes, but when we are in mode M, manual mode, photographer has the whole control, and you need to select what would be the desired shutter speed and aperture for that given shot, providing the greatest latitude for creative expression. So you can, with the purpose, we can make that image look darker or make it more brighter, like a high key image. We can do that with purpose. Choosing the wrong combination, however, results in photographs that are overexposed and underexposed. So when we are doing this unknowingly, we'll call it as an error, that image coming overexposed and underexposed. But when we are doing this with purpose, that will be treated as an art, that we are doing that with purpose. So all things matters, and you need to keep work with your DSLR device. Just do some experiment for the exposure when you are in the manual mode. We therefore recommend using the camera exposure indicator as a guide when choosing aperture and shutter speed. So always look at the light meter and how the light will be in the final image. In all three modes, P, S, A, and all these are semi modes. So exposure is automatically adjusted for the optimal results. So these are modes, we'll call it as semi modes, because you are controlling only one of the aspects for exposure. A to Z exposure balance. So we'll just try to understand what is this plus minus button on the device and how we can use it. So it's a kind of light meter to control the light on your device, and how to make your photos lighter and darker using this plus minus button exposure compensation. We'll just understand. Camera light meter is not error free. So when we see camera light meter, sometimes it can mislead. It can give you wrong information that it's image going to coming brighter, or you can say the darker. And I'll just make you understand that what it means. An exposure compensation definition can be described as a way to override the camera metering. So camera metering is a very big topic. We'll take that separately at the end part of this workshop. But just to give you an idea, camera metering is something, it's the capability for the device to calculate the average exposure. So it's having different metering modes. Evaluative and matrix metering is the default one, which calculates the average exposure by looking at the complete frame. So whatever the elements, objects we have in our frame, it is going to take exposure calculation from all those. So that's but if we are using exposure composition, it can override that metering. So if image is coming little darker, we can make the image brighter using this exposure compensation button. This works well in optimal lighting conditions and weather. So if you have good lighting condition, it's a sunny weather, not a cloudy day, so you can definitely take advantage of it. Exposure compensation is only available in auto and semi-auto mode. So you have to be very careful. If you are going to use exposure compensation, it will going to help you when you are in auto mode of the device or semi-auto mode like PSA mode. So if you are in this modes, then only you are going to take advantage of it. And the button on Canon, it looks like this with the plus minus button. We have dedicated button for exposure compensation. The similar button we have in the Nikon device, and in Fuji device we have a dedicated dial button to control that exposure compensation. So these are just few examples. You can see the image with the white backgrounds. So at the zero balance, it means we are not having any change in the exposure compensation settings. The image will be looking quite dull. If we add more exposure, we are adding more light to the image. And we are with +2, we have a pure white background for that image. And if you see this example here, the more we go onto that plus values like 1, 2, 3, you'll see that it's getting more brighter. If we go under the negative, -1, -2, -3, that become more darker. So we can use it when photos are too bright, and we can use the plus values. The numbers, we can use it when the photos are too dark to make that image look brighter, like the image on the top with the vase. We added the exposure and its image looking quite brighter on the +2. So likewise, if we are doing portrait photography, even in the studio lighting, if we are having -3, -2 values, you can see the difference here. We take all these questions in the Q&A session. Someone is asking that what is the difference between exposure and ISO. We'll have detailed explain this topic for the ISO also, so you will understand it. So -3 exposure compensation, you can see the background is a little darker compared to -2. So you can control that light, how the camera is sensing the light from the background with this exposure compensation, even in the studio light. Now we'll just learn in details for the shutter speed. So definition of shutter speed is that it's a length of time when the camera shutter remains open. So sometimes we call it as exposure time, that allow the light to reach the camera sensor. So we can have these sample shutter speeds, which we can use in our experiments and practice. 1/4000 to 1000. So this is the shutter speed to freeze the fast moving objects. But for general photography, general purpose photos, we can do with the shutter speed of 1/250 to 1/60, depends on your the lens you are using. So there is there is a thumb rule for shutter speed, that whatever the focal length of shutter lens you are using, like if you are using a 50 mm lens, then your shutter speed will be anything or on or above 1/50. So there is no shutter speed of 1/50. We'll having 1/60 shutter speed on the camera settings. So that shutter speed you need when you are working with 50 mm of lens, focal length, and the objects can still be showing or having slow movement, so you can still manage to capture it with that shutter speed. But if you are considering for long exposure, then it will be 1/2 to 1/30 to capture motion blur in consistent movement. So when people walking or some consistent movement you are observing in the subject, you can use that shutter speed to capture and show the motions. Shutter speed of 2 seconds to 10 seconds. Consider this as very long exposure to paint with light, stars of astrophotography, fireworks on festivals like Diwali, and to make river water look as a glass. So if you are at the riverside, you can use the shutter speed and a very dark light conditions, because to use the long shutter speed, long exposure, we need to have some ND filters kind of. So black glasses is the we can say the component, we call it ND filter. We can use that, or we have to wait for really dark evening time to capture the long exposure, because camera sensor will remain open for that amount of time and it will capture more and more light. Even if you are in a dark place and you are doing a long exposure like 10 seconds, you will see that image will coming a lot brighter. It's like a daytime when you complete the capture. if you are in the evening light condition. These are the examples for shutter speed. On the image on the left side, you can see it's captured with the fast shutter speed, and everything looked quite static, and the person moving, and that's also looking quite still. But image on the right side is having slow shutter speeds. Only the elements which are still looking, we can say that they are looking as a still because they are fixed and they could not move. But the person moving, it's coming as a showing blurry with the motion. So because of slow shutter speed, shutter speeds values will be somewhere around 30 seconds to as high as 1/4000. But in some recent devices, latest devices, we have shutter speed of 1/8000 also. And on camera dial button, it is S mode we have to select. In Canon, it will be STV. Handheld shutter speed. So as we have understood that handheld shutter speed, that whatever the focal length of lens you are using, it will be the reciprocal of that focal length or faster than that to complete a handheld. And if you have a VR function on the lens, vibration reduction, and in Canon we call it as a stabilization option. If we have in the lens or then the device, we can use that in our favor, and we can reduce the shutter speeds by 1 or 2 stop. Like we can, if we are having 50 mm lens, we can have a shutter speed of 1/30 also. And but prime lenses do not have those features. Most of the prime lens you will not find it. If your device supports, then only. But if we are using a zoom lens like the 70 to 300 mm, they have VR functions. We can, this is a button, VR button we have to enable, we have to turn it on, and you can use that. And for 300 mm focal length, the shutter speed would be required to have 1/320, but with VR function on, we can manage it with 1/250 also. So VR function is a disadvantage for handheld photography. Aperture. So aperture controls the amount of light reaching the sensor. It's a kind of eye for the DSLR camera. That the more the eye open, the more lighter light will be captured by the sensor. So aperture size will regulate the depth of field also. So it's controlled that how the depth of field is something. If you are pointing on I'm just always give the example, like if you are focusing on the device or on the subject here, the depth of field be some we can say some distance in front of it and some distance behind of it. There are depth of field calculator available in the App Store. You can download it, and you can just feed in the device setting like the lens, focal length, distance between the subject and the camera, and aperture, what aperture you are going to use. So all these three factors decide that how the depth of field will be for that given distance with that aperture and lens. So you can control the depth of field. So f1.4 gives you very shallow depth of field, create bokeh effect for good low light. So if you're having good low light condition, you can definitely manage it with that, because it's capturing more and more light. On a brighter day, you will see that image coming a lot brighter, but to compensate it, we can increase the shutter speed. If you increase the shutter speed, it will stop the light, and you can still manage to get that good quality images. But always look for the good low light condition around sunset or sunrise time to get better quality images. f2.8 to f5.6, good for portraits and sports photography. So you're capturing portraits or doing some sports events photography, you should be working within this range, 2.8 to 5.6. It will give you a good balance between the background bokeh and showing some actions in the background also. So it's quite a good balance between the good quality bokeh and some story in the background should be showing like that. f8 to f16, good for landscape to get increased depth of field. So if you're capturing landscape photography, if you are doing landscape photography, then we should be between that. So f16 is desired one, because at f16 you have everything is in focus. for the landscape. So anything in the foreground with the background, everything will be in focus. You can identify what is the thing in the background, even if they are at the miles away. F16 to F32, good for long exposure and create star burst effect with small focal length. So if you have a lens like 50 mm, you can use that long exposure with F16 to F32 and you will see that light bulbs looking like a star. They will give you a star effect on that. Depth of field. The distance in front of and behind the focus point that appears to be in the focus is referred to as depth of field. So as we have understood, when you're focusing on the subject, some point in front of it, some point behind it, it will be in the focus. And when we call it a large f number, it's a small aperture. People used to get confused between the terms large aperture and small aperture. Small aperture means large f number. Small f number means large aperture. So large aperture means the camera eye will be fully open. It's wide open. We call it as a wide aperture sometimes. So it's completely whatever the limit you have on the lens, you can see the limit on the lens barrel. You will see that what is the maximum and minimum aperture it supports. Some lenses have fixed aperture value, so at all the focal length you will have that same aperture value. Those lenses are costlier compared to other lenses. And when you are in the small aperture, it increases the depth of field with large f number. Like if you are in f22, everything will be in focus in front of and behind. We are focusing in the middle box, in the middle, just in the middle of that. But if you see the image on the right, anything beyond, behind and in front, they are getting out of focus. That's due to the large aperture. It decreases the depth of field. Now we'll just understand that how we can segment it or we can segregate the aperture values. So if you are at f1.4, it's very large aperture. f2.4, 2.8, we call it as a large aperture, and 5.6 somewhere, 5.6 to f8 is somewhere in the middle. We call it as a medium aperture. F11, we can see it from where it starts the small aperture value, and it can go beyond. And f22 is very small aperture. The small f number means a small depth of field, and the lighter the image will be. It depends on the light condition, of course. And large f number means large depth of field and darker the image. So it will stop the light reaching the sensor with large depth of field. And on the dial button, we have A. Now we'll just talk about the ISO. And as a definition, ISO sensitivity is a measure of the camera's ability to capture light. So it's your camera ability to capture light, but we can control it using ISO. Digital camera converts the light that falls on the image sensor into electrical signals for processing. So when digital camera capture image, it is based on the light technology. So light falls on the image sensor. It is going to convert it into the electrical signals, and for processing, it will record the image. ISO sensitivity is raised by amplifying the signal. So we can raise the ISO sensitivity, but what it will do in the backend, it will just amplifying the signal strength to capture more and more light. In other words, if ISO sensitivity is raised from 100 to 200, while aperture left is unchanged, it means we are not making any change in the aperture, the same exposure can be achieved with shutter speed twice as fast. So if you see that shutter speed is getting low and its light condition is not good, you want to continue with the handheld photography, you want to raise the shutter speed but without compromising on the aperture. What you can do, you can raise that ISO and you will get higher shutter speed at the same aperture. So you will get the same exposure with the higher shutter speed. If you raise ISO sensitivity, you can choose faster shutter speeds and reduce the camera blur. So as I said, you can avoid the camera blur by handshake or something if you have a high shutter speed above or around your focal length, reciprocal of that. This is why people say that ISO sensitivity should be raised if lighting is poor. So this should be our last resort to counter the light condition, that we should raise ISO only when it requires, which means when the light condition is not good for handheld, we can raise the ISO. No flash, low photography. So low light photography. So we are not using flash for low light photography in these examples. When lighting is poor, you can use flash. And to light the portrait subjects, flash units, however, have limited range. So all the flash units have some limited range. When you buy external lighting source like flash speed lights, you should have some good understanding on the guide number. So the higher the guide number, the powerful the flash will be, the how long it can reach. So the distance measurement and the capability all depends on that guide number. If you raise ISO sensitivity, you can optimally expose both the portrait subjects and the background without using flash at all. So if you see image on the right, it's taken at high ISO sensitivity with flash off, and you can see almost everything in the ambient, it's quite visible. So it's able to capture all the ambient light. Photo taken on the left side, it's taken with the flash. You can see the flash having limited range. Subject is quite lit up, but background it's quite dark. So that's the kind of effect you will get when you're using flash. Noise at high ISO level. So if you are raising the ISO sensitivity, it allows you faster shutter speed, but it'll introduce that artifacts. We call it as a noise. So artifacts, so it means it's showing some grainy effect. Raising the ISO sensitivity amplifies the electronical signals, which also amplifies any noise in the signal. So if you are using high ISO, make sure that it's having good lighting or not. So it means your subject is in bright color, you will see the lesser effect of noise on that. If the subject is quite dark and the light condition is not good, you are raising ISO, it will be quite visible. It will be quite noticeable that the grainy effect is taking all the, we can say, it's just taking over all the quality, so details will not be there. As a result, the higher the ISO sensitivity, with more obvious the effect of noise on your photographs. The same is true of all digital cameras. We recommend that you raise ISO sensitivity only as high as needed to avoid blur. So this should be your thumb rule, that you raise the ISO, but only till that point when what is required to get a handheld shutter speed if you are not having a tripod. If you're having a tripod, you can definitely work with the slow shutter speed if subject is not moving. ISO sensitivity can be set manually by the photographer or automatically by the camera. So if you are using the ISO sensitivity settings on your camera device, you can set it automatically. And when we do that automatic function of ISO, we have to give that camera, we can say that some kind of limit that it will not go beyond that much high level of ISO. So we have to test the ISO capability of our device. You should have a different ISO level images captured in the same light condition on the same subject, and you will understand that what is the capability of your device for that ISO noise reduction. So we have to set that limit on that photo ISO settings, that camera will not go beyond that ISO settings. Like if I am having, we can say, the more grainy effect after ISO 1000, I'll just make that maximum ISO limit to 1000. So even at the auto ISO setting, it will not go beyond 1000 ISO. Otherwise, it can go to 12,000 and beyond than that. Now we'll just work on the camera simulator app and try to understand the exposure, we can say the modes, and what are the control of these components, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, how we can control it. I'm going to just open this simulator. This is online, and you can definitely work on it, and it will help you choose. to get more control or more understanding of how these control works in the real time. So if you see, we are in the manual mode, we can do any change on these settings. But if we are in a shutter priority mode, you can see only we can control that shutter speed. So aperture is automatically getting changed. So for this image, if I have high shutter speed, then only I can freeze that fan wings. So let me try with the 1/350, and it's automatically controlling the ISO to make that to make sure that we are getting a good exposure. You can see the result. So you can see at 1/350, still I can see its wings are not, we can say still, it's quite blurry. You can raise the shutter speed to somewhere around 1/1500. Let's see. Yeah, that's for moving wings and fan blades, and that 1/1500 is also not enough. Let's go to the highest. We have just doubled that shutter speed, 1/3000. Yeah, it's quite still. So we need that much of high shutter speed. And if you see that aperture is the widest, the smallest possible f number, 2.8 on that setting, and it's controlled by the camera. And likewise, if we are in aperture priority, we can control the aperture, and camera is going to control the shutter speed to compensate that exposure. So if you see, if I'm going to that small aperture with the high f number, large f number, and the shutter speed will be 1/3 seconds. So it's quite slow. What it's doing, it's trying to compensate that exposure. It's almost invisible. You can see we could not observe that fan blades. If we go at that widest, so it's taking that shutter speed of 1/80 at ISO 400. So you can see we are focusing on that fan blades, and anything behind it is a blurry, out of focus. Anything in front, in the foreground, is out of focus. You can keep play with that aperture value, and you understand that how it's controlling it. You can see that depth of field increased. You can see some balls are in good focus. Background also we can observe that it's improved, that the depth of field improved with 5.6 compared to 2.8. But when we are in manual mode, we can just play with the settings and we can make any change. So with f8, I'm having 1/2 settings, 1/2 shutter speed, and ISO we can change. And if you see the symbol here, the more ISO, the more grainy effect. The clean image I'm getting at 1600 ISO. And exposure meter, if you see, it's showing it will be very overexposed image. So I'll just keep reducing that ISO. So it's still showing one stop higher, so it's still very overexposed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to increase the shutter speed. So I'm at 1/4 second of shutter speed with ISO 100. I can see the exposure is good. So if we complete this exposure, the exposure is coming good. If we take down that aperture 2.8, and image is coming overexposed. So again, we have to raise the shutter speed to make a good exposure. So you can see it's a 1/45 second. We are getting good exposure, and if we make the shutter speed really high, you can see it's showing very underexposed. So even at the widest of aperture 2.8, and we have high shutter speed and there is a light condition is not supportive, you will get that underexposed image. And we can do that reverse with the 1 second exposure. It's overexposed. That's how we can play with it. The simulator is really helpful, and even if you have a DSLR, if you don't have DSLR device, you can still play with the settings before buying the DSLR. So this is a to Z of focusing mode. So we'll just try to understand the focusing modes available in the DSLR device. In Nikon, we call it as for a single one-shot focusing mode, we call it as AFS. In Canon, it's one-shot AF, which represents a single focus capability. So when you are using this mode of focusing, and when you, we can say, take exposure, take a focus on the subject, it will just lock the focus. If you are just keep holding that half shutter release button on the halfway, you are not completing the exposure, it will make that square look green. If you are on live view LCD on the screen, you will see that square looking green. It will lock that focus there. And if subject do any movement, going in front, coming in front, or going behind on that focus point, you will see that you are losing the focus. So this is the kind of we can say the limitation. You should need to make sure that subject is not having so much movement, if they are quite still, to use this AFS and one-shot focusing mode. In this mode, when you depress the shutter release halfway, the camera focuses on the subject just once. There's no continuous adjustments. This mode saves battery power and is ideal for subjects that aren't moving. So if subject not making much movement, this is the ideal because it's saving a lot of battery power. You can see the lot of we can say the focal points we have on the sensor, but only one of them will be active. So the center one considered to be the strongest focal point, and it give you more accurate result compared to the focal point besides. And on camera settings on Nikon, it will be look like this. Focusing modes at AFS, you need to select. On Canon, it's a one shot. Make sure you are selecting one shot when you want to use this focusing mode. Continuous focusing mode. So in Canon, we call it as AI Servo AF. In Nikon, it's AFC, stands for continuous focus, and this mode is most useful to keeping moving objects sharp within the viewfinder. If you can track it, you need to track that object. In continuous focusing mode, the camera detects the subject's movements and refocuses accordingly to keep the object sharp as a tag. So you have to keep your focal point right on the subject. If you miss it, then camera will start taking focus something on the behind where you're having the focal point. So you have to make sure you're filling the frame with the subject and you are not losing that focal point from it. We can use a 3D tracking automatic selection of that focusing mode to just as a supportive hand, that it'll just take that focusing from the subject and track it using the technique. This mode uses a lot of battery power because it is continuously focusing and refocusing. So it requires a lot of battery power. So if you are in AFC mode, continuous focusing mode, AI Servo in Canon, then you will see that battery getting drained a lot quicker compared to AFS or one shot. Camera settings looks like on Nikon it's AFC, you can see in the settings. For Canon it's AI Servo. Automatic focusing mode, so it's a combination of both. So it's controlled by the camera because we say automatic. So camera will identify if the subject is not making so much movement, it will consider that it's going to take image with one shot focusing mode. If subject is making some movement, it will consider that it's a moving subject and it will take that shot in the continuous focusing mode. So this is default autofocus mode on the camera that have this feature. you have to remember that photography can be an art, and in art you have to go with it what's in your mind's eye. So what sometimes with purpose we are taking some uh, images of the elements with autofocus. So you want to create some artistic effect in that frame, so you can control it in that other focusing modes. This mode maintains the focus if you change subject or subject move. So as I said, it's a camera which is deciding if subject is still stationary subject or it's a moving subject doing some movements. If subject moves, auto switches from one shot AF to AI servo. So that's the behavior of it. Manual focusing mode. So this is the advanced technique. So if we are having some problem with the focusing, so sometimes it's a contrast condition, camera not able to focus correctly. So light condition is not supportive for the auto-focusing system. We have to rely on the manual focusing. So this is MF in Nikon. And this is MF in Nikon, and which stands for manual focus. On many lenses, you would see AF MF switch. So if you see the lens switch image here, so in lenses also we have option to switch between the autofocus and manual focus. Manually focusing the camera is perhaps the most frustrating barrier between the good and great photography. So it's people still hesitate to work with the manual focus. They feel more comfortable with autofocusing. But manual focusing, when you start develop your taste with the manual focus, you will feel more comfortable, more controlled on the focusing system. Achieving perfect focus requires using the distance measurement on the lens barrel, and even perhaps measuring the distance from the lens to the subject with the tape measurement. So professional photographers, when they do documentary and all, they used to carry a tape measurement with them, and they used to calculate that what would be the distance between the camera and the subject, and based on that they do some calculation. There are some applications also available like depth of field calculator, as we discussed. We can just feed in the complete settings with accurate measurement of the distance, and you will get that what would be the depth of field for that given frame. This will give you the most accurate focus point. On camera screens, on info screen, you will have that visibility that what is the focusing mode. Is AFA, it's notified here. Under the camera settings, we can still go inside the camera settings and you can see what is the focusing mode selected. But it's always better to work with the buttons instead of going into the settings. So a lot of camera nowadays, they give you option to control all these settings from the buttons. So you can create some shortcut button also. So sometimes you will see the dedicated buttons like AF and MF switch on the lens. Even on the device, we have that option to switch between autofocus and manual focus. Manual focusing mode. So there is a diopter adjustment. So you can see some small diopter adjustment. So what it does, it lets you make the minutes adjust to the focusing capacity based upon irregularities in your eyesight. So if you are using specs, then you don't need to use it if you are using a DSLR with diopter adjustment. So you can adjust that diopter adjustment according to your eye, that how the subject, at what level the subject will be look sharper. And you don't need to use specs while using the DSLR if you are using this function. You can use depth of field preview button also. There is a PV button available, and if your device have, you can use it, and it will give you that final image, the feel that like we see the difference between the mirrorless and the DSLR. That mirrorless having EVF function, but in DSLR we have this preview function. So it's similar to that. With PV function, we can directly see that what will be the preview of final image. If you are not using this PV function or it's not having in your device, you will get that final image only after capture. Manual focus is essential when you focus on non-traditional subject. For example, a subject that is in the background and the foreground is busy and dominating. So as I said, when it's difficult to work with the auto-focusing system, manual focus is something which is going to help you in that scenario, in light conditions. Note, focus indicators blinking keeps works even when you are in manual focus mode of lens or the camera, which is visible in viewfinder only. So if you are looking through the viewfinder, in Nikon device, there is one small dot on the right side. It keeps blink, and when you have subject in focus, you are having focal point on the subject. It'll stop blinking when the subject is in focus. So that's the indicator, and that indicator works even when you are in manual focusing mode. So that's a trick kind of that you can use it, but you have to make sure that your focal point on the subject when you are adjusting the focusing ring on the lens. Except extreme low light conditions. So most of the time, except extreme low light condition, this could help you to get the subject in the tag sharp when having manual focus on. So if you are able to view that subject clearly, the light condition is not that bad. You are able to see the details with the manual focus. Then you can use this trick. Now we'll just go in details of metering modes. Metering modes are one of the most powerful and underutilized settings on your digital camera. So many people they don't used to go to the metering mode settings. They just work with that default metering modes like evaluating on the Canon and matrix metering on the Nikon device. So how do you change your metering mode? So do you have any experience that you are working with the metering modes? Anyone can share their experience. You can unmute yourself and you can share your experience if you have with the metering modes. Okay, we got response that still didn't use the DSLR. Or what other tool? Okay, let's continue. I believe we are still trying to discuss, no problem. But whenever you are joining such workshops, better to be more interactive. So if you speak, if you discuss, you will be having more confidence and you will get most of the benefit of joining such workshops. Okay, best photographs always starts with the best original photo, and that can only happen when you get a proper exposure, and getting a proper exposure depends heavily on how you control your camera settings in metering modes. So in metering modes, in Nikon we have 3 metering modes: matrix metering, center weighted meterings, and spot metering. In Canon we have evaluative metering, partial metering mode, and spot metering and center weighted. So you must have noticed in Canon we have advantage of partial metering mode. Now we'll just understand little details about these metering modes. So this is the default metering mode, matrix metering. And what it do, it will read that light information from complete exposure. It's taking average exposure value from all the elements showing in the frame. So it is biased to the focus point selected. So whatever the focus point you have selected, the center one is the strongest, as I said. If you can select any of the focal point, but it will take that most of the calculation from that selected focal point. And it also depends on the several factors, including distance to the subject, colors of the scene, focus area, and other elements. So all things depends that how the calculation will be in order to find the best exposure for the whole scene. This mode is excellent under following circumstances. You want to work fast with minimal change in settings. So you don't want to work with a lot of change in settings. You can work with the matrix metering mode. Light condition is changing quickly. So light condition really changing very fast. You can around sunset and sunrise time, you can definitely work with the symmetric metering, and it will help you to get good quality of exposure. You are covering actions and angle to subject is changing quickly. Again, when there is a lot of change going into the frame, so it can be light condition, it can be subject movement. So if you are capturing sports image like that, so you can rely on this matrix metering mode. The lighting and contrast are not extreme, so you have to be very careful when you are in this. So when lighting is not extreme, it's not too overexposed, so you are not in a bright sunny day, it's not too underexposed in the later part of the day. and contrast are not extreme, so you can easily identify that. You can differentiate between the subject and the background, so you can utilize this. These are the examples of matrix metering mode. So I captured the image with this mode only. In this camera's extra weight is given to the point that is near to the focus point that is being used. So as I said, whatever the focal point you have selected, it is going to give advantage or the weightage onto that focal point, and it will calculate most of the lighting average near to the focus point. Center weighted metering. So this mode determines the correct exposure from about 60 to 80% of the actual frame and focusing on the center. So we expect that subject will be in the center. That's why the name is like that, center weighted metering. It's going to give more weighted on the center of that. With the focal point you have given selected in the center of it. The mode operates under assumption that you will most likely center your subject in the viewfinder when you would choose the center weighted metering mode. So it's perfect for event situations like wedding. Most of the time, event photographers like wedding photographers, they select a center weighted metering mode because it helps to eliminate any problem from the background backlighting. So it's going to take most of the exposure from the center. You don't want the background to influence the metering reading. You're trying to meter a light from object against a dark background or vice versa. So again, when you are working with the acceptable light conditions of the subject and the background, it's really not having some extreme lighting condition, you can still manage with that. You want to keep your subject in center within the frame, such as portraits. So in most of the time in portraits, we use this center weighted metering mode. So most useful in event photography where the use of spot metering mode is not practical. So spot metering mode we'll understand in coming slides, and where that is not practical, it's not practical to use spot metering mode. We can't fill the frame every time with the subject. We can rely on center weighted metering. Focal length and metering modes both are same. No, focal length is somewhere that your lens focal we are talking about. So, like we have understood the example of 50 mm focal length. Metering mode is something how your camera looking at the frame. So as we have understood in the matrix metering, camera is going to take average calculation of the light by looking at the complete frame, but in center weighted metering, it's taking 60 to 80% of exposure calculation. That when we are talking about focal length, it's about the lens focal length, and when we are talking about metering modes, it means we are letting camera to decide that how the light will be calculated. That in center weighted metering, it's giving 60 to 80% of weightage to the center point. So we are assuming that our subject will be in the center, and it's taking all the light calculation from there. And anything around the element, so even if we have bright element around the frame, it is not going to take into the calculation for exposure. We will not have any negative impact for exposure. I hope the answer is clear. Now we'll just understand spot metering. Spot metering mode is the most accurate and the hardest metering mode. So when we say most accurate, because it's taking your exposure calculation from 1 to 5% of total image area that you see in your viewfinder. It's usually represented by a small red dot and fixed directly in the center when you see through the viewfinder. So we'll see just one focal point in the center of that viewfinder, and it is going to take all the calculation from that. You will not see any other focal point active. You would use it by pointing it at the subject element that you want to take the meter reading from. So we have to make sure so we have to make sure that we are filling the frame. We are pointing our focal point right on the subject where we want to take exposure reading. So that's the, we can say that, that's why we say it's very hardest metering mode, because you have to have very good control on the focusing. Spot metering mode is extremely useful. It allows you to exactly fine-tune your exposure. So you will never miss the exposure if you are using spot metering mode, because it's going to take 1 to 5%. It means all calculation around that subject it is going to take. The camera won't be fooled by an extreme contrast situation which has backlighting. Likewise, if you are in an outdoor doing photography, portrait, your friend or someone, we can say the sky is in the background, so it's completely bright element as a backlight. But if you are using spot metering mode, you can still get good exposure on the face with the help of spot metering mode. You can get an accurate meter reading from an object where you have set the focal point. It will allow you to accurately determine an exposure setting for a bright object against a dark background, so vice versa. So as I said, even if you have a bright background in the background or dark background in the background, so that's how we can control it. Likewise, in the exposure compensation, we can tell that camera that it's a brighter or darker. Same way, if we can use spot metering mode, we can have our subject in front of a dark background, and we can take a meter reading, and you will see that it is helping you to get good exposure on the subject. These are just example. Spot makes sure you always check your camera meter reading mode before shooting to ensure you are getting correct exposure. So this should be your habit, that you should be having habit of checking that exposure metering modes, that what is the metering mode you are using. So it will give you more control, and you will see that quality is getting improved. Partial metering mode. So this is special metering mode we have in the Canon. So what it'll do, it'll just a kind of middle way, or it's a kind of advantage on the spot metering, that where you will feel that you need just the exposure calculation in middle of somewhere between the spot metering and center weighted metering. So the light measures around 10 to 15% of the frame. It's a kind of extended area of the frame which is metered. This mode serves as the middle point between the spot metering and center weighted calculation, similar to the spot metering. But it's taking a little, we can say, larger portion of that area. Like instead of 1 to 5%, it's taking 10 to 15%. It is useful when some areas of the scene would affect the overall exposure, making it too dark or light. It has few benefits. Creates a tight, accurate reading from approximately 20% of the image area. Works like the spot metering mode, but takes into account a larger area. The metering area is often adjustable, allowing you to move it around the viewfinder. So we can adjust our metering area calculations, and we can move it around the viewfinder by looking at the viewfinder. Use center weighted metering mode instead of partial metering mode if that option is not available on the camera. So if you are having a Nikon device, you will see that partial metering mode is not there. You can still manage with that center weighted metering mode. This spot and partial metering mode is better for macro photography or short frames. So it will not much difference, because you are going to fill the frame. Even if you are in a matrix metering mode and evaluative metering mode, and you are filling the frame, it will not make much difference. But if we are using spot metering, just to make sure there is no effect of the background backlight, it can be dark, it can be bright, there should be no impact of that backlighting on our subject, we can say that exposure calculation. So that's the benefit of using spot metering. But if you are talking about macro photography, it doesn't make any difference, because you are going to fill the frame with the subject. But in your macro photography also, if you are having some elements from the background also visible, like some bright light is coming, you can really take advantage of it. Now we'll just understand and just go through the few composition techniques. So before that, I believe. So rule of third is the most talked about composition techniques, perhaps because it is so simple to implement. So when we say it's so simple, because we can just enable that grid in our LCD also, in the DSLR camera LCD, we can enable that grid for rule of third. And when we enable that rule of third grid, we will be having two horizontal line and two vertical line in our screen. So we can use it. And when we are using rule of third, it means we are having some intersection points for these lines. And it's when they are crossing each other on these intersection points, these are the focal points. So we have to place our elements, interesting elements, around those focal points. And all you need to do is divide your frame vertically into 3 equal parts and horizontally into 3 equal parts. So we can do that in post-processing. We can do that in the DSLR camera LCD screen itself. By placing your subject on one of the 4 points where these dividing lines meet. So you will encourage the viewer away from the center of the frame. So the purpose of using rule of third is that we are encouraging viewer to do not concentrate on the center of the image, just look at the around that intersection point. So by scientifically it's proved that when we look at any image, we will look the image, read that image around those intersection points. So that's where that rule of third, it's quite known to be having more impact. And when you are using rule of third to capture your subject, it will give you more impact than the other by keeping your subject in the middle. So we'll understand it more in detail, that even if we are having subject in the middle, how we can use it in different composition techniques. So this forces them to look around the image and makes your composition more interesting. So we'll just go through few examples of rule of third. So this is scene composition, elements we have, and subject. It's a cinematic visual. So if you see this frame, I divided with 2 horizontal and 2 vertical frames. So focal point where interesting elements or the moments I have around rule of third. So we can have, even if we are having a single portrait where only you have one person in your portrait frame, you can place that person on one of the vertical lines to implement the rule of third composition. So this is action composition. So all the elements I'm covering here in the intersection points. So these are the intersection points. We can easily see that we are utilizing all the intersection points in the rule of thirds. Even I'm covering the background, the splash, the cup I'm covering, and the cookies I'm covering. So all these complex visual, it's looking quite balanced when we are implementing rule of third. Cut out unnecessary elements. So when we say cut out unnecessary elements, so there are multiple techniques of it. Either we can fill the frame with that subject, so there will be nothing showing around it. We can use the post-processing technique to hide the elements around, like what I've done for this image. In the post-processing, I added some vignette effect with the extreme dark shades. And you can see that it's completely changed. The field completely changed for this image. We can use a shallow depth of field. We can use large aperture, small f number to hide the elements in the background. We can use. We can go to the near to the subject if we are using macro lenses, or we can use zoom lens to fill the frame. So all these techniques we can use. One way you can do this by cutting out all the clutters in the world and just showing them what you want them to see. So what you want your viewer to see, you can just make sure that only that thing will be visible in the whole frame. So as I said, we can crop it, we can zoom it to fill the frame, we can do post-processing techniques to hide the elements around it. So just to make sure we are isolating that elements. We are isolating your subject. So using a longer focal length for a narrow depth of field, so using depth of field to isolate the subject from other elements in the scene, or using shadows to hide the do not contribute to the message you are trying to give. So if you are having a frame where some shadow also coming into picture, you can use the shadow in your favor by hiding the elements. You have to just change your point of view to use it well in your favor. These are just example. In this photo of butterfly or wildflower, I set a aperture of 5.6 on 7300 mm zoom lens. So you can see my focal length is on the largest possible focal length, 300 mm zoom, and which is not very wide. That aperture is not looking very wide, 5.6, but because of the zoom and the distance between the subject and the background, I was able to isolate that subject. This focuses attention on the butterfly, as the blurred background is now less distracting. So we could not see any distractions from the background. This technique is excellent way to simplify your composition. So when we say simplify the composition, it means we are just making viewer to only observe and feel the subject, nothing from the background. So in this photo of a man portrait, I set it aperture of 3.5 and lens I was having 85 mm. It's a prime lens, and I was able to isolate it with the help of shallow aperture value, shallow depth of field, I should say. 3.5 was good enough for me to hide the background elements. So again, this focuses our attention on the subject, and this has worked very well even on a busy street in local market area. Here are elements in the background completely blurred and not creating any distractions, which is looking good for the portrait captured on the street. So even if that portrait captured on the street, it's looking good because we are able to hide that cluttered background or distractions in the background. Leading lines. So as I said, we can use this technique of leading line when we don't want our subject to be in the middle. We can have that leading line in our favor in that. So one simple way to use leading lines, use the lines is for drawing the power in your image, like you are leading the viewer eyes to a subject or to something interesting in your frame. Lines that are simply graphic can be used to lead the viewer around your image. These are called leading lines or spot and line. So sometimes we call that composition technique as spot and line also. Spot and line means we are leading to a spot composition technique. When you are looking at the scene and deciding how to compose it, consider what your subject is first, and then consider what elements in the scene might draw viewer towards the subject. So when you are composing a frame, and if you are fortunate enough, you find some leading lines there, try to engage it, try to involve it in your frame, and make sure that your lines are reaching to that subject. So that will add more, we can say, the advantage of adding leading lines. Can you find receding fence like fences that draws you to the whole house on the hill? Maybe there's a crack on the concrete. So these are just examples leading to a flower growing at the base of wall. So the viewers eye will naturally follow the lines, so they can be very useful in directing people to what you want them to look at. So if we are able to use leading lines, we will be able to help that direct viewer's eye. So these are just examples. I'm using diagonal lines, vertical lines, and just I was able to capture the movement. These are diagonal lines and a combination of zigzag lines. This is also very famous, and I was fortunate enough to capture it in the nature photography. This is a combination techniques of repetition. So if you find repetition in your frame, it can be arrangement of similar elements. Even if I found that flower petals looking quite repetitive in nature, so you can add some intensity, some energy in your frame. They'll look more interesting. Things like fence posts, the lines of pedestrian crossing, so some zebra crossing lines on the street, some of part of trees, group of trees you can capture. They'll create sense of repetition. Anything that can be arranged into repeating pattern can be great intensity. to photograph. Depending on the subject matter, it may be calming like a rock pillar. So if there's still objects, elements you are including in your frame, it will be giving you very calm feeling. It can be alarming like endless rows of people. It means people's walking on the streets and you're capturing and creating a sense of repetition. They'll give you a different feel out of it. You can see this even if in the flower nature photography we have these patterns, and they are not in regular but still creating some harmony, creating layers. So this is very famous technique of creating layers. We can have different elements in our frame at different depth, at different distance, and you'll be able to create an illusion of a kind of 3D image. You can feel that we have some depth in this image, and because we have elements and subjects at different levels, so different layers we call it. We can create this kind of compositions in any kind of photography. If you are doing street, you are doing wildlife photography, you can use this technique. Even in the product shoots also, we can see that we have seen one of the example where I was using some background elements also. We can use that layer effect. It can be one layer, two layer, three layer. So the more you add it, the more intensity you will add in your frame. So one technique for adding depth in your image is layering things over the top of others. Sometimes we call this technique of up things. Sometimes if you Google it out, you will find this composition technique named as up things. Simply put, you can cover the part of your frame with something closer to the camera in order to give the illusion of depth of field. And depth in order to create illusion of depth. So we are trying to make it illusion that it's not a 2D image, it's a 3D image. You can use the leaves of tree to frame couple in the park, empty juice glasses. So like you are capturing any event photography, you can use use this technique to create illusion, to create depth in your scene, and it will help you to convey the story. Sometimes we do this in the sports photography also, that we are capturing that action, and we are also showing that something going in the background, including audience. And like in the event photography, we are showing the speaker with the audience in the background. That will also help you to convey the story and make a good frame that doesn't simply show the speaker out of context. All of these things not only fill your frame with interesting elements, they further the story you are trying to tell. It means we are completing the story by including all the elements. If you see this image, I just have this lady in front as my first layer. The second layer I have the lady looking at that. And this is the third layer background I have. Different layers with different focus objects. No, it's not like that. I just have one of the focus point on one of my student. You can see she was just looking at the image after completing capture. So I just completed this with one single focal point, and the rest of the layers created because they are in different distance. So because of benefit of getting the focusing and having different layers in different distance, it helped me to create this composition with layers. So you can simulate this in different photographic category genres also, like wildlife photography, nature photography. You have to just focus on your subject and something in the background, something in the foreground. You can include that elements in different distance, and you will be able to create that. Sometimes we take focus from the background layer, like the third layer, and sometimes we take focus on the second layer or first layer. So you will have different feel, but I believe somewhere in the middle of second and third layer, having a focus, it will give you more prominent or more good effect compared to others. And just for conclusions, these are just not the only elements of composition. There are many more. I have almost 25 composition techniques. I have almost 25 composition techniques covered in my different workshops modules. I have basic composition modules and advanced composition modules. So there in workshops, I covered all the composition techniques. So these are just a basic one, but if you follow these composition techniques, you will definitely see the improvements in your photography. And in this basic photography workshop, there is only so much of this huge topic of composition techniques I can cover. I hope that you will have some actionable points here, and definitely it will help you to improve your company. In my upcoming workshops, I have tomorrow street photography workshop in Pune, Juna Bazaar. And tomorrow again in the evening, I have session of online workshop for Lightroom introduction. So there I'm going to just cover the Lightroom from beginners level to some kind of intermediate level of editing process using Lightroom. And on 18th of June, I have my outdoor workshop of birds photography. That will begin at 7 a.m. The location will be Sinagar Valley, Pune location. And the same day, I have my evening session of Photoshop. So it's a quite intensive, or we can say very good photo post-processing session for including Photoshop. It will be 4-hour session. It will start at 4 p.m. on 18th June. That will be online session for post-processing using Photoshop. You can visit my website and you'll find a lot of workshops available, already scheduled till December this year. Yes, definitely I can continue with the workshops in other parts of the country, but I need sponsor for that. And even if I plan my own to complete the workshops, for workshops outside the Pune location and different part of the countries, I can plan it, but I need sponsor, or I need a good strength of my students to be coming in that. No, this is the complete session. There will be no second session for this workshop. We have completed this workshop of 2 hours, and we have covered all the topics included in this session. So there will be no second session of this workshop. That tomorrow I have a different workshop, as I said, for Lightroom introduction. So I'm going to show the complete editing process using Lightroom from beginner to intermediate level. PPT you can't get, sorry, I cannot share, but what you can do, you can refer the recording of this session and you will be able to see all this PPT again in the recorded session. And you could always send your queries on the email ID info@sumithphotoworld.com, and I'll definitely try to help you out in your photography journey. I'll help you, whatever the concern, whatever the question you have related to photography, that will be helpful for you. If you can take advantage of it, you can get it. Now you can unmute yourself and we can talk about it. So whatever the points we have for discussion, you all are allowed to unmute and we can speak. There was one question from Sridev about difference between exposure and ISO. I believe now it's clear because we have covered the topic of ISO. So that is very much clear that what's the difference between exposure and just one of the component ISO. I would request you to please also submit your feedback in the website section where you can find all the workshop schedule. You can find the calendar there on this page. If anyone want to discuss any question you have related to your photography, so what is your past experience, you can unmute yourself and we can discuss. What budget DSLR camera if you are looking to buy? Mostly I advise for D3400, but you can check other models available for Nikon from Nikon, because I mostly talk about Nikon devices. So you can check different models around the same budget and compare the features. So just find out different reviews and see that what are the limitations and the advantage of those devices. Based on that, you can decide. But it all depends on your budget. Depends, as I said, depends on your budget. If you have that budget, just find the device available around those budget. You can compare their features. Again, the same question. So you are deciding. I have one question that they want to select or choose between mirrorless and the DSLR. So as I explained, if you don't have any camera and you are just starting this DSLR kind of photography, then go for a budget DSLR instead of mirrorless, because in the budget mirrorless camera you will not find that many features which you can easily get in your budget DSLR. So I always recommend to go for a budget DSLR device instead of a budget mirrorless camera, because there is a cost difference and it's quite huge. So whatever your budget, you can just find the different devices available, different models available. Whatever the manufacturer you are interested in, it can be Nikon, Canon, Sony, so even the Fuji camera you want to. So just find out the device models available in your budget and compare the features between those devices. Okay, mirrorless, can I learn its features shortly than DSLR? It's not like that, because if you have noticed the inside functionality components, there are components difference definitely between the mirrorless and the DSLR, but the basic function will remain same. Likewise, if you are having ISO or aperture, shutter speed, all will function the same way in both devices. There is no difference, like shutter speed or aperture will work differently in the mirrorless and differently in the DSLR. They'll function same. So features will definitely remain same for the basic components, but what is the advantage you have? The lightweight body, the small sensor makes a smaller body you can easily carry, and so burst mode, as I said, because of contrast detection, focusing system, burst mode you have advantage with the mirrorless. And many people believe that there is a fraction of improvement in the terms of quality because there are lesser number of lenses. When we have lesser number of lenses, you will find that image quality is definitely getting improved. Even if you add some lenses in your existing device, if you have, you will see that image quality getting down because of extra lenses. And mirrorless, when we say mirrorless, there is a one less mirror there components. You will see that it's having lesser elements. You will definitely have some improvement in the quality, but again, you will have some lesser feature in a budget mirrorless camera compared to the budget DSLR. So just compare the features available in both devices in the same budget, and based on that you can decide your selection. So I'm just going to wait for 2 more minutes. If you have any question, please speak if possible. If not, you can type it. 2 minutes, I'll just conclude this session. Just received feedback from Brinda. You gave 4 stars, so I believe you can share your input here and what we can do to get 5 stars. Because without suggestions, it's very difficult to share in detail. That will be good. So when you are adding your photos in the feedback session, then make sure you add at least feedback with 4 or 5 lines, because then only I can consider it for the testimonial. To publish your feedback, I need that at least 4 or 5 lines of feedback. So some kind of descriptive, so other can refer your feedback to understand that how we are doing. Certificates, yeah, definitely. You will get certificates, and because you have submitted feedback, and you'll definitely get it. Thank you email also. By Tuesday, I'm going to share that email with you all. You'll get your certificate for today's workshop.